It's our theme song. Rachel. If you'd like to dance, you're more than welcome.
I like there's a theme song.
All right, it's really good, really good. Welcome, everybody, on Halloween. It is Gina here with Noon on Tuesday. And since it's Halloween, we thought it would be really cool to talk about all those spooky, somewhat scary little microorganisms that make cheese as delicious as it is. So we brought in the expert. I mean, we're super lucky today to have Rachel Dutton. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you.
Who is, yes, assistant professor. Welcome, welcome. Everybody loves Rachel. You can hear this. Yes, calm down, everybody. She is the assistant professor at the UCSD Biological Sciences Center.
Right.
And seriously, literally national expert. I mean, you've really become the go-to person to talk about microorganisms and cheese, yes?
Yes, it's
really cool.
It's so fun to be able to just be in this area where there aren't that many people studying kind of the creepy crawlies on cheese.
On cheese. And that's what makes it so good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what would cheese be without them?
Yeah.
It wouldn't be cheese.
No, it'd be really boring.
That's really good, Rachel. Go back just a little bit. Tell us about yourself and how you even got into microbiology.
Yeah, so I was actually an undergraduate at UC San Diego.
Yeah.
So I was here a while back now, and I decided to try and volunteer in a microbiology lab. I had never done science before. I was actually a communications major at the time.
Wow, okay.
I wanted to do something like this as a living. And I just completely fell in love with microbes. And they're just these phenomenal little organisms that you don't see, right? They're basically...
But they're everywhere.
They're everywhere, and they're controlling everything.
Yeah.
Whether
the littlest guys.
Yeah, and whether, you're thinking about, the ocean or the atmosphere or the soils or food, these microbes are everywhere.
Sure.
And so I just completely fell in love with how amazing these little tiny organisms are, and so I switched my major from communications to molecular biology, which nobody ever does. And
that seems like I've not heard it before.
And then I went to graduate school in microbiology at Harvard. So I moved to Boston from San Diego. Yeah. And then I did graduate school, and at that time I was studying E. coli, which, you hear about E. coli as kind of a nasty bug.
Yeah,
right?
everyone's super scared of that.
You're scared of it. Yeah, exactly. But I wasn't studying it because I was interested in food at the time. It's actually turns out to be this really great organism for understanding how cells work. Okay. So we use it as kind of like a model in the lab. Yeah. But at the same time, when I was in grad school, I was becoming completely obsessed with food. So so
that's a good thing to have an obsession.
In my abundant free time as a graduate student, which is not really we don't really have that much. I was just completely nerding out about food. So I would read Harold McGee's on food and cooking, like before I went to bed at night, and just started learning more and more about food. And I was naturally drawn to fermented foods because I was a microbiologist.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah. And so I thought, well, in microbiology, what I had become really interested in is communities of microbes and how species interact with each other.
Okay.
So we have all these complex communities in the soil and in our gut, and we were becoming more and more interested in which types of species were there, but we didn't know a whole lot about what they were doing and how they actually form these communities.
Interesting. And how they get along with each other?
Exactly.
Okay.
Are they fighting? Are they talking to each other? Are they helping each other out? And so, what I thought was, wouldn't it be nice as if we had a really simple community to study to teach us about how to do that? Right. And, while I was reading all of my food science nerdy things.
And tasting along the way.
And eating, things like cheese. I started thinking about fermented foods as simple ecosystems. Okay. And at the time, a French postdoc in our lab, so she had just come back from the Savoie region of France. She brought this beautiful piece of Tome de Savoie, probably illegally, back into the US.
We won't tell.
She brought it back to the lab, and I looked at it, and I saw this, the rind of that cheese is gorgeous.
We'll have to show a picture up there. It is just ridiculously thick.
It's very thick.
Layered.
Yes, and layered. Exactly. Those layers really struck me. And so I looked at this beautiful piece of cheese and this rind on top of it, and I said, oh, that's a microbial community, right? That's all microbes.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and so I immediately took a slice of the cheese.
And had you had it before?
I had it before, but I had never looked at it in that way.
Sure.
Yeah,
How did this get here?
And so I took it back to the lab, and I started, trying to see if I could actually grow these different species from the cheese.
Wild.
And then I, started thinking, well, wouldn't this be a cool thing to study? Like use cheese as a simple ecosystem. And anyway, so I ended up, after I got my PhD, I got this fellowship, which gave me like a 5-year funding source to study whatever I wanted.
Okay.
So I said, okay, well, I'm going to study cheese.
This is what we're going to do. Cheese it is. Lucky for us. And I mean, and lucky for cheesemakers and, right? Really?
Yeah. So I've, when I first got started, this was back in 2010. And I said, well, I've read a lot about cheese, but I don't really know that much about how it's made and things like that. So I said, well, I probably should go
learn the basics.
And so I had a really good relationship with my local cheesemongers.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and this was back in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So this was Formaggio Kitchen.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, and
wonderful
so
shop.
There was a cheesemonger there, Vince Razionale, who he said, well, if you're interested in studying cheese, you should talk to Jasper Hill. Because Andy and Matteo Keeler are really sort of ahead of the curve in terms of thinking about the science, not necessarily the science, but he just thought that they would be really open to this idea.
Exactly. Of marrying, I would imagine, the art of cheesemaking with the science of cheesemaking.
Yeah, and they had this really progressive kind of business model, and it was just a really wonderful creative place. And so
cool.
I reached out to Matteo. I met him actually at the cheese shop. He was there doing a tasting.
This is all like serendipitous.
Yeah.
It sounds like your whole story, leads to the other.
So I met Matteo, and I gave him my little pitch of like, hey, this is kind of crazy, but I think I might devote my career to studying cheese microbiology. And he's like, great. And I said, can I come up and intern and work on the farm? And he said, absolutely.
I'm sure he just pulled you into the car and off you went.
So then I spent 2 months working on the farm.
Was that just
making cheese, working in the caves?
Yeah.
It was the hardest work I've ever done.
I mean, it doesn't stop, right? I mean, this is a dedication. Again, blessed are the cheesemakers that will dedicate themselves to this craft.
Yeah, it was incredible.
Yeah, hard work.
An academic and a scientist, I'm not used to sort of physical labor.
You're like, my brain is really on fire. But
So, early days, really hard physical work.
But so you got to do milking the cows, say.
So
I
got to try my hand at milking the cows. The cows did not appreciate my efforts.
Your skills.
Yeah, no, they were. But I would, I would get up and we would make cheese in the morning. So be there at 5 a.m.
Sure.
Make cheese.
And make cheese, and that takes, it's a long period of time.
It's a long period of time. There's a lot of, it's sort of like, most of the time you're cleaning. I would say
that's what 90% of it says.
Yeah, exactly. It's mostly you're scrubbing down floors and equipment and everything.
Does that make you sad? Is it killing some good microorganisms or no? You know what I mean?
Well, there's you have to have a sanitary production environment.
Yeah,
the microbes are gonna
find their way.
Things are gonna find their way.
Okay.
So it was it's a lot of cleaning, a lot of waiting around for the milk to culture and cultivate these organisms.
Sure.
And then it's go as soon as the cheese is ready.
Then you've got a schedule. I've got to do this by then and this by then to make everything match. And the whole time, I envision you, Rachel, with a microscope, and you do you pull the little cultures underneath and kind of see what's happening at each stage of the game?
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't doing that at the time.
Okay.
I didn't have a microscope with me, but since I left, and over the years, the relationship that my lab has had with Jasper Hill has really just grown, and they've actually built now a microbiology lab.
How cool.
In their cave.
Wow. That's got to be the first, probably the only at a cheesemaker.
It's definitely the only in the U.S. In an artisan cheesemaking facility to have something like that.
That is really super. Is it all for, I know, because they age, lots of other producers' products, but do they do this for educational purposes, for their own, or combination of both, to have this whole lab?
To have the lab, it is part of it is R&D. So the idea is trying to figure out how the microbes control flavor and how they can then control the microbes. And then part of it is, there's a lot of quality control that goes into aging cheese. And so microbiology is a big part of the quality.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
Yeah. So it's a really cool cool thing to have a lab there
Yes.
in the caves.
Do you go back? Have you been back?
I go back all the time.
That's so cool.
Hopefully. And yeah, it's a very special place for me.
Yeah.
I met my husband there.
Oh my gosh. That's so cool.
He
Again,
proposed to me.
Serendipitous
there.
story.
Yeah.
Amongst the caves and the wheels. Was it a certain cheese that now you have an affinity for that was part of your proposal?
Yeah, he was wrapping cheese and we, saw each other through the pack and ship window.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. This was meant to be, I think. It's sounding like all of this is truly, truly meant to be. That's great, Rachel. So tell us, we obviously know milk plays a huge role in how a cheese tastes.
Right.
How much of how a cheese tastes is on the organisms, on the little microbial organisms that are there? I'm going to be honest with you. I can eat cheese. I love it. I can sell it and talk about it. But when it comes to that nitty-gritty science, you're going to teach me.
Yeah. It's actually like when I first started working with cheese, that was one of my favorite things was talking to cheesemongers and telling them about the science of the cheese. Right. Because you guys work with these things every single day and you know the stories and you know so much about it, but then sort of being able to kind of open up this black box of the science and the microbiology it's so fun.
Super fun.
I feel like cheesemongers have the best questions.
Okay, good.
So it's a lot of the flavor is about microbiology. So if you were to just take milk and so the first stage of cheese making involves microbiology. So you have this lactic acid fermentation.
Okay.
So you add this specific type of bacteria.
Okay, so you want to do that.
You want to do it.
And you have a specific one that you are adding.
Yeah, because if you don't add something specific and you just let milk sit, we all know what happens in our refrigerator. It spoils. Right. And so we want to control the spoilage in a sense. We want to control which microbes are there so that things that spoil milk or make it, gross and toxic don't grow.
Don't grow.
Yeah.
So this kind of, in my head, is thinking it's leading to that community thing.
Yeah.
You're wanting this good community to wipe out the bad one.
Yeah. And I sort of think of cheesemakers as, over this, let's say 10,000 years that people have been making cheese, they really have figured out how to control these microbial ecosystems. Like that's what they're doing when they're making cheese, even if that's not what they're thinking about. So the first steps are controlling the growth of these specific types of bacteria. So lactic acid bacteria you find all over the world. They're on the surfaces of plants. They're on our skin.
Interesting.
They're found in most fermented foods, so like pickles and sauerkraut and kimchi. All of those things have lactic acid bacteria and yogurt.
And yogurt.
Yeah.
But how come some people, how does that relate to being lactose intolerant? Or,
Yeah,
because that seems like, can you not eat a pickle if you're lactose intolerant?
No,
then?
so I kind of think of the lactic acid bacteria as the lactose tolerant bacteria of the world. So
the lactose tolerant, okay.
Yeah, so what they can do is actually break down lactose. They can break down other sugars as well. So like in vegetables, there's other types of sugars that they eat. But in milk, the primary sugar source is lactose.
Yes.
So they're able to actually eat lactose.
Interesting.
And basically break it down.
Yeah.
So if you're lactose intolerant, basically these bacteria will break the lactose down for you.
Wow. Okay.
So the first part of cheese making is really closely related to making yogurt. So you're adding lactic acid bacteria and they're fermenting the milk.
Yep, I'm picturing it.
Okay, and you're getting a lot of acid produced.
At the same time.
Because that's their byproduct of eating the lactose.
Got it, okay.
And then another thing cheesemakers do is add rennet.
Exactly.
Which is
that's not a bacteria.
It's not a bacteria.
Considered a bacteria.
No,
but,
it's an enzyme.
Okay.
And so that helps kind of break down the protein in just the right way so that you get all the protein coming together and separating from the liquid. So the protein and fat kind of separate out from the liquid. So those are your curds and your whey.
Yep.
Now, the curds, if you've ever tasted fresh cheese curds that haven't been aged or salted it's kind of like milk Jell-O.
That's a really good description.
Yeah. So it's sweet, milky, just a little bit tart. But, it doesn't taste that different than yogurt.
Exactly. Yeah. And texturally, too, depending how soft it is.
Yeah.
Kind of the same texture. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of making those curds has to do with the microbes that are there. The flavor at that point is still pretty much just milk. So the really exciting part for me
here it comes
is when you take these fresh curds and you form them into a wheel of cheese.
Okay.
And then somebody in the history of cheese making decided that taking that fresh milky wheel of cheese and putting it in a dark, damp cave
would be a good thing.
Right? Like that doesn't seem like a good idea.
Doesn't at all. Like it seems it goes against everything that should be okay.
Yeah, and it turns out it was like the best idea any human being has ever had.
Why caves?
So caves have
and damp.
Very specific environment that's cool and damp. And it really allows the growth of many different types of microbes that end up colonizing this fresh cheese.
And so they're attracted to what's in that cheese.
Yeah, so
they're attracted to...
Exactly. So there's lots of protein and fat.
And they just know it, and they will find their way to it.
They will find their way to it and start eating it, right?
Okay.
So they eat cheese just like we eat cheese, right? So it's a food source for them. And, and so... in the cave, these different microorganisms will grow on the cheese, and depending on what kind of cheese you make, if it's a really sort of moist cheese, you'll have different types of microbes than a really dry cheese.
Okay.
And as those microbes grow, they're eating the cheese, and they're basically spitting out the things that they can't eat.
Okay.
And those are the flavors.
And that's the flavor.
Yeah.
Is that also the rinds? Does that contribute, like to the tome de savoir that you talked about? What they spit out is building that natural rind on there?
As they're growing, they reproduce, right?
Yeah.
They make more cells, and they form these communities on the surface. So they're eating the cheese, which allows them to form these communities, and those communities, the growth of those microbes into the communities is what is giving the flavor.
Is giving that intense flavor.
Yeah.
How big of a community are we talking about? Like, could you put it in numbers?
Yeah, so...
and we're talking so tiny small.
Tiny small organisms. Yeah. So if you take, let's say, a teaspoon full of cheese rind.
Okay.
You have about, let me do the math here. I think it's about somewhere around 1 trillion cells.
1 trillion living things.
Yeah.
On that teaspoon of rind-ish.
Let's say somewhere between 1 billion and 1 trillion.
Oh my gosh, that's so many. That's so crazy.
And we have, around 10 to 20 different species living in there.
In there.
Yeah.
All together doing good things to create the flavor and the rinds that we see.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they stay living.
They're alive.
And you want them to stay alive.
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking at the cheese shop, it's important that we don't keep everything tightly wrapped in plastic all the time.
Yeah.
Is that what happens? Because they're not breathing?
They're living, breathing organisms, just like us.
That's really great.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of cool because as the cheese ages, you actually get different species growing, kind of like a forest changes over time.
Okay.
Yeah. That's
Good
what's
analogy.
happening every time you make a cheese. You're making a microbial forest.
Right. Forest of beautiful. We're going to have to learn to love them.
Oh,
everything gets, I think, focused like is on the scary ones.
Yeah.
And you never hear about the good ones.
Right, exactly.
Is there a name of a good one like that's like a scientific name we could use? That what is there a best one? Is there one that you find in all varieties of cheese?
So we do find certain things over and over again. Let me give you a few examples. So some of the things that we can actually see with our eyes are the fungi, right? The molds.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Right? And so anytime you look at one of these aged cheeses, you see mold on the surface.
On the surface. And it's good.
Yeah. And it's good mold. And so let's say you have a piece of camembert.
Yep.
Right? You have that white, fluffy
the beautiful,
stuff,
bloomy stuff.
Which is mold. Right? And the name of that mold is Penicillium camemberti.
Ah, nice. Yep.
Yep. And so it grows really well on the surface of camembert. And what it's doing there, it's actually eating the protein. So it really loves the protein.
It really does.
Yeah. And it breaks the protein down and creates all these kind of mushroomy flavors.
Which I love, right?
Yeah. And so it's, molds are a type of fungus. Mushrooms are a type of fungus. So they're cousins of each other.
And that's why some of the flavors in cheese are often described as mushroomy, which is just lovely.
Exactly.
I love this community of the camemberti.
It's so good.
I love them.
Yes.
I want them to grow everywhere. Interesting. Now, they're eating the proteins, but there's so much in there. They're not taking away from the protein that's in cheese that's in for us.
I mean, they eat a little bit.
Okay. Yeah.
But, relative to what we get out of it.
Sure.
It's not as much. But it's kind of cool because if you slice into a wheel of camembert that's ripening, you can see it's ripening from the surface in, right?
Yep.
So if it's not fully ripened, you'll still have kind of a chalky middle.
Yeah.
And that's because the mold is growing on the surface and breaking it down from the outside in.
All the way down. Yeah. And that's when you get the different textures.
Yeah.
Is from that ripening.
Yeah. And eventually, if you let it go long enough and you keep it in the right conditions and keep the mold happy, the cheese will become completely runny, right?
Which is the best.
Yeah.
That's when you want it, but if you like it other ways, that's fine too.
Yeah.
What about inside the cheese? Like I'm thinking the Swiss cheeses. How do they get the holes?
Right.
Where are these coming from?
Yeah. So this is another microbe. It's actually a bacterium.
Okay.
So often, again, like E. coli, we think of bacteria as bad.
Yeah.
Because there's not a lot, but there's a handful of bacteria that can cause disease. But there are way, way more bacteria that help us in many different ways. And so in cheese, there is a bacterium with a pretty complicated name.
Okay.
It's called Propionibacterium.
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 Within cheese.
Inside the cheese.
Okay.
And it only grows inside the cheese because it doesn't like oxygen.
Okay.
So it grows inside the cheese where there's no oxygen.
No breathing room.
Yep.
Okay.
And what it does is it takes the leftovers from the lactic acid bacteria.
Okay.
So they ate the lactose and produced acid.
Mm-hmm.
And now the Propionibacteria, what it does is it takes that acid and eats it.
Okay.
And then spits out gas.
That's crazy.
So it spits out
that little
carbon dioxide gas.
Uh-huh.
And so as it's growing inside the cheese, it's basically creating this gas bubble around itself.
Sure.
And that's where the holes come from.
And then the holes are there. Yeah. Some are very big, some are very small.
And so depending on so this Propionibacterium likes warmer conditions. And so in, say, Switzerland, when you're producing one of these cheeses like Emmental or something like that, you would keep it in a warm incubated room. And depending on how long you keep it in that room, the holes will get bigger and bigger.
Bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Have you seen any super huge ones?
Yeah,
I mean, really?
Definitely. There's like Emmental and cheeses
that have
like
the
that.
biggest.
They can just have enormous,
huge
holes. Yeah,
that's so interesting, just fascinating. And then they're still there when you eat it. When you just cut it and eat it, they're happy and alive. Yes. If they die, is that when the cheese goes bad?
No,
not necessarily. Okay.
Yeah,
so they're not together.
It's good when they die because they release all of their enzymes and all the flavors they've accumulated inside their cells.
Yeah.
So that can also be part of the aging process, is these waves of bacterial growth and death.
And death, will give you then the different flavors, which I never attributed those microorganisms to flavor, more to texture, I guess, in my head. The rinds, that kind of stuff.
I mean, even with Propionibacterium that's making the holes, in addition to CO2 gas, carbon dioxide gas, it's also making propionic acid, which is, that tangy flavor you have in Swiss cheeses? Yeah. That's propionic acid. So the bacterium is actually giving Swiss cheeses their characteristic flavor and appearance.
Yeah. That's so crazy.
Yeah.
So crazy. It's just completely fascinating to me, like the science of it all. That's awesome. What about, everybody knows, I think the most kind of famous one are the cheese mites.
Oh, yeah.
Mimolette and the cheese mites. I mean, you do look, I've seen pictures super close up, and it makes you want to run away. Yes. But you can't. That cheese is delicious, and it's beautiful. And tell us about the mites.
Yeah, so we actually have a video on our lab website.
You do?
If anybody wants
Where
to go
is that?
on there.
Yes.
So it's the DuttonLab.com.
Okay.
And if you go to videos, we have a video of a mite.
Okay.
Under a microscope.
Under a microscope, okay.
And they basically, as a cheese ages, this is usually the cheeses that are harder. You age them for longer periods of time, like a year or more.
Sure.
And they develop these really kind of crusty rinds.
Yeah. We have a picture floating about.
Like that.
Super crusty and cavernous kind of looking.
And so the mites, what they do is they love to eat the fungus on the surface of the cheese. So I kind of think of them as like cows grazing on
the thing. That's funny,
forest.
And size-wise, aren't they some of the bigger ones anyway? Like cows? They're big, right?
They're big. Yeah. So when to our naked eye, they would look kind of like a piece of dust.
Okay.
But if you kind of watch these pieces of dust for a while, they'll slowly move.
I think that shifted.
Yeah. And so they grow in they can get very dense colonies on the surface of cheeses, and cheesemakers have to constantly get rid of them. Otherwise, they'll basically eat through the fungus, eat through the rind, and into the cheese. And that's what happens in Mimolette.
Yeah.
So Mimolette is a perfect Halloween cheese, right?
That is the best Halloween cheese. Yeah, it looks like a cantaloupe.
Yeah.
Bright orange. Mighty on the outside.
Yeah, and it has these craters on the outside. And those craters are from the mites eating into the cheese.
Do the cheesemakers put them on? How do they get there?
Yeah, so in Mimolette, they are encouraged
there.
Yeah. They will just find their way naturally to cheese. I mean,
It's
any
crazy.
cheesemaker who's aging cheese for long periods of time will have mites around. And have to either, accept them
if
or
they want them right in the cheese or
try
not.
and get rid of them.
Yeah.
But they're super creepy looking, and whenever I look under the microscope at a mite, it always kind of scares me.
Does it scare you away? Will you eat the rind of a mimolette ever?
I mean,
chew on a bite?
Yeah, I will.
Me too.
I will. But we can see them sort of like eating the fungus. And
so weird.
They kind of like eat the strands of fungus, the mold, like spaghetti kind of.
That is so weird. And we can see this on this video at the DuttonLab.com.
Yeah.
That sounds awesome. I'm going to run to see this because that's got to be one of the spookiest sounding things that we have.
Yeah.
But fascinating, right? Because it's all natural and it's all good. And if you eat them, they don't harm you. They don't. Yeah.
They're just kind of gross looking.
Right. Yeah. It's just wild, but it's all good. You just not think about it because it's all delicious.
Yes.
We had a question, and I know you've worked many times with Rob, who is our Academy of Cheese manager and events person, and he had a question because he really wanted to know, and let me make sure I say it completely right. He wants professional explanation and like a layman's term is why folks with a penicillin allergy, because you mentioned penicillin with the camembert, and we can get to the blue cheeses now.
Yeah.
Why folks with a penicillin allergy don't get sick from eating blue cheese? Like, do you not have an allergy from that penicillin?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So penicillin, the antibiotic, comes from a mold.
Okay.
Also called penicillium.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Sharing the name. That's the confusion maybe.
Yes. So they're kind of like distant cousins.
Okay.
So they're both part of the same group. So they're both penicillium molds. The one with the antibiotic is Penicillium chrysogenum.
Okay.
And the one on cheese is Penicillium camemberti.
Okay.
So they're totally different species.
Of a certain mold.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And so while they're both different types of penicillium, they don't both produce the antibiotic penicillin.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So just because you are a penicillium mold doesn't mean you produce penicillin.
Ah, so you have to be the type that you mentioned was the antibiotic.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
To produce the
Does that make sense?
Antibiotic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
So anyone that has a penicillin allergy shouldn't be scared to eat a blue cheese.
No.
Because it completely different and it can't happen.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, this is good. Because a lot of people, and even myself sometimes, I don't know if it's in the head, like I'd be like, oh, do you feel that tickle in the back of your throat? Like I'm allergic to kiwi. For some reason, I don't know what the kiwi does to me. It gives me that little tickly thing. And a lot of people have said with blue, oh, I'm allergic to penicillin. If I eat a bunch of blue cheese, I get this little tickly thing. In the head, maybe a little, or it's hard to say. Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to say.
Okay, but really it is scientifically completely different strain. Like you said, a cousin that does different things.
Exactly.
One's in a band, one is a lawyer. They're not going to do the same thing.
And just like we have Penicillium camemberti, we have another species in cheese, Penicillium roqueforti, which is the blue mold.
Which is the blue mold, which we see most often, right, in the blues?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, it's also a penicillium. It doesn't produce the antibiotic penicillin.
Okay.
And it behaves very differently than Penicillium camemberti even, right? Even though they both grow on cheese, they behave very differently.
Very different, create different, they spit out different things?
Exactly. So they actually eat different, they like to eat different things. So Penicillium camemberti likes to eat the protein. Penicillium roqueforti likes to eat fat.
Oh,
so like in sheep milk cheeses, like Roquefort.
Roquefort, okay. Coming
which
together
has a
now.
lot of fat.
Sure.
The Penicillium roqueforti grows very well there, and it breaks down the fat to produce all these really fun flavors, right? Like the spiciness that you get in blue cheeses is from the fat breaking down by the Penicillium roqueforti.
Okay.
And then the smell of blue cheese is also from the fat breaking down by this mold. So we can actually smell the mold.
Smell the mold. And that's kind of the case with a lot of them, too. Yeah. That seems like the most distinct, I guess, that when people recognize maybe the most.
Exactly, yeah.
But producing flavor and producing aroma and producing texture, these little guys.
And color and,
This is crazy.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just fascinating. Did the old wives' tale or the lore of blue cheeses was the lady in the cave eating lunch, leaves her bread there.
Yes.
Those spores create what is now in the blue.
Yeah.
Myth?
I mean, we'll never know.
We'll never know. We can't ask, I guess.
But no, but these molds
some of those molds do on bread.
Naturally live in these caves.
Okay,
so,
which is why they protect them so well, right? I mean, the Roquefort caves are famous for their type of... Right?
Yeah.
penicillium floating around in there,
exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Crazy. What about at Jasper Hill? Because they've got Bailey Hazen Blue. We got to give them a shout. Isn't that
cheese.
So fabulous? Yeah. So fabulous. Not only, so you're telling me now, the beautiful rind that gets.
Yeah.
It's all from these little colonies.
Yes.
Because you get that look.
Yes.
Some of that aroma that's just so rich, and it's definitely cavey.
Yeah.
I get some of that. But then again, some mushroomy. I feel that there's a lot of mushroom in that one as well.
It really is.
Yeah. What about the holes, the crevices in the blue?
Yeah.
You know, is it the same thing like in the Swiss kind of that we talked about, or not really?
So when you make blue cheese, the way you prepare the curds is you try and kind of loosely pack them so you get little pockets of air.
Right.
And the blue mold likes these just like little bits of oxygen.
Yeah.
So you kind of encourage these crevices and openness to the cheese so that the blue mold will grow more.
Will grow. I'm always fascinated, Rachel, when we get, vacuum packed half wheel of, say, Roquefort.
Right.
And, it's sealed for transport, it's around the world.
Yeah.
No air. Cut that thing open. There's no blue to be seen right away. Right. It's kind of golden in color.
Oh, yeah.
The veins and everything in it. And I remember, first starting in the business, and we have cheese mites crawling on the screen. If anybody wants to see, there they are. Opening the pack, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's gold. Turning around, getting something else. And when I turned back, it was blue.
Yeah.
It's like it needed that air. And then it just like a kind of a magic, it turned blue. Yeah, yes. Fascinating because it wants the air. It needs the air to do that. That is super, super cool. Jasper Hill, is there the Listeria? Like, is that that's a bad colony? That's completely different something. That's the big fear.
Thing.
That is the scary thing. And how do we avoid it? Or what do we look for to make sure we don't have it? Or what are signs?
I mean, it's an infrequent foodborne pathogen, but it does cause really bad problems when it's present. And so cheesemakers, they have many, many different types of sanitation and procedures and protocols to try and make sure that there's not contamination from the outside environment in their cheese-making facility, that the cows are all healthy.
Yep.
So it's a lot about kind of making cheese in an environment where you're aware that this is a problem and you take measures to prevent it. Yeah.
How do they get there? Like, is it a moisture thing? Is it, or it just can be many things?
It can be many things. So Listeria can live in the soil.
Okay.
Or it can infect animals. And so it has different sources.
Ways of coming in.
Yeah.
Can we see that on cheese? Is there a telltale sign ever? Not really.
No, there's not. And so many cheesemakers will test their cheeses on a regular basis to make sure they're not contaminated.
Yeah. Yep.
As a precaution, even though it's very rare.
Exactly. That's what I understand. In cheese, the percentage of the possibility of Listeria is so infinitesimal small.
Yeah, but it is
right. But it is there.
A legitimate concern.
Of course. Is it the same thing if you have a bad mussel or a bad salad? Is this the same?
It's not the same organism, but same sort of thing. Is this occasional contamination by bacteria that can cause disease.
Yeah. Crazy. So just be very clean, which of course, and like I know the cheesemakers test, from all over the world. Cheesemakers here, of course, and then cheesemakers in other countries that we get from test continuously.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because there's really a balance because you do want to encourage these good microorganisms, but you don't want to open up your system to
the bad ones. Yeah. But good always defeats the evil ones, I think.
Pretty much.
Excellent. Very good to know. Very good to know. Rachel, I know we can we learn more? If a person wants to learn a lot more about this, the DuttonLab.com would be a great resource. Is there a special book that if someone is really interested in just dabbling more into microorganisms in food?
Yeah. So actually,
would you recommend?
Friends of mine, Francis and Bronwyn Percival,
just
wrote a book on. It is Reinventing the Wheel.
Yes.
And it's all about the history of cheesemaking and also microbiology of milk and how cheesemakers are trying to preserve that and the history of it.
And the history of it all. So that'd be a good start. She is going to be with us in Liberty Station sometime in November.
Yes,
and we're going to have a book signing and do the whole thing. So that's really great. You can get the book there then or get it soon before that. But okay, that's a good one.
It's
kind of learn
a really
little
great
bit
read.
more.
Yeah.
And
it gives you a little bit of history as well.
Yeah.
It's not a a ton of science.
Mm-hmm.
It's much more friendly to.
Okay, that's perfect. It'd be a way to get the toes wet. Yeah,
exactly.
into the whole science side of
I
things.
Give any recommendations for science books because nobody wants to read this.
A little, some of these, how do you make a science book exciting to read? I'm not sure. If someone could come up with that, that might be really, really big. But thank you, Rachel. Gosh, I learned a lot. I'm not scared of these things at all. You shouldn't be either. It sounds like a lot of people find it. And wait, is there any question? No, are we good? Nope, all good. Everyone, check out the DuttonLab.com for information and the cool video. If you like what you hear, please go to iTunes and leave a rating. And if you do, send me an email, and I'm going to get you a free Venissimo tote bag. Rachel gets a free one because she's here today to teach us.
Thank
so
you.
There we all go. Thank you all. Have a good week, and talk to you next time. Bye.
So fascinating.